Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the overall positive indicators as far as the economy is concerned and whether they will have the kind of trickle-down effect that we are anticipating, the effect that they've already had as far as Pakistan Stock Exchange is concerned, and overall as far as inflation is concerned. Is that trend likely to continue in terms of prices further coming down and trickling down to the masses? We'll be talking about this. We'll be talking about, of course, the growth that we've seen as far as exports are concerned, also the role of the SIFC with regard to this, all of that today on Perspective. I have with me Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, who's a senior economist, also former advisor to Ministry of Finance. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Dr. Manzoor Ahmed, who's former Ambassador to WTO. Thank you for joining us today. And Dr. Usman Chohan, who is advisor on economy with gas. Thank you for being with us today. Mehtab Haider, who is a senior journalist. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start with Dr. Khaqan. Dr. Khaqan, we've spoken about economy, regularly. Also, this particular trend, this, welcome. We've seen the rise that we've seen as far as the Pakistan Stock Exchange is concerned. How do you look at this, the growth that as far as exports, the sector is concerned? Is it significant? How, or do you think the trend itself will continue? The role that SIFC has had in overall stabilizing the situation? I'd like your opinion on all these, starting with, of course, stock exchange.
So Mahrukh, whenever you and I have spoken, I've always maintained that Pakistan's engagement with the fund is right now, an anchor which ensures that your external viability remains comfortable. And that is the prime job of the IMF, that countries which are in external liquidity or external difficulty to help and ensure that they remain comfortable during the time the program is with Pakistan. So let's say 3 years. So we need about $18 billion. I'm hoping that all of that, besides that one oil facility, has been arranged. So whenever a country enters the fund, stabilization in the first year occurs quite quickly. And that means the following. You can call it macro stabilization or just stabilization. Your inflation tends to go down. That means the rise in prices is now somewhere in the ballpark of 7 to 9%. Previously, the 2 years we saw very high inflation in Pakistan, rising to 38% in May 23. Your current account is settled. Your reserves right now are more than $11.5 billion. So they cover 2 years of 2 months of imports, nearly 2.5 months of imports. So
someone like, who's not as, economically savvy as you yourself are, to understand as far as the stock exchange is concerned, is it an indicator of our overall economic health at this time?
So when the fund didn't come through, our reserves were nearly $3 billion. Pakistan Stock Exchange was trading at default levels. Our price to earnings was 3, which means, just say that our prices were at 3. We have traded on the average around 7 to 8 on price earnings. So there was a re-rating required as we came out of default levels. So stabilization took place. And the biggest challenge that was there was to bring down inflation. And as inflation came down, what you also saw is that the policy rate came down by 700 BPS. Further anticipation right now, I think IBOR is 12, 13%. So I can see another 1.5 to 2% fall in the coming months. Whenever your fixed income securities don't offer you the kind of returns people are looking for, the other two avenues are either the stock market or the real estate. Even real estate, the kind of taxation we've had doesn't offer that kind of benefit anymore. So the re-rating of the PEs from 3, right now they are at about 5.5, I think, or between 5 and 6. So there's been a re-rating. So liquidity improved, institutional funding improved. Pakistan's low historic price to earnings had to be re-rated. They were very cheap because fundamentals had changed in the sense that companies like the banks, like the fertilizer and even the energy companies, because of the higher inflation.
Yeah, I want to talk about energy companies, but Dr. Khaqan, as far as investor confidence is concerned, do you think that we are looking at, an overall increase as far as the graph is concerned, or no?
So certainly, one thing that you asked, Pakistan, as I say, many people say, oh, this doesn't work, this economics doesn't work in Pakistan. Let me say that Pakistan's economic prosperity is very much tied to good economics. I always said that you have to keep real rates positive. Your inflation did come down because curtailed demand. Secondly, yes, the stock market is not very broad. The number of investors are still 300,000. All that is true, but it's still a barometer of the stabilization that the country has clearly seen, and it is reflective of that. So that's number one thing. In terms of investor confidence, so the easiest way to see this is the following, and I think I've tweeted about this also. There is a business confidence indices that the state bank does. In October alone, it is up 4% month on month, and I think 7% year on year. So you can see the BCI there rising, which is done every month. So it's like a high frequency indicator. So you can see that. The other things that you can also see in terms of investment in the stock market is the following. Pakistan's right now foreign interest is there, local domestic interest is there, local institutional interest is there. The political instability and then a quick reversal of that instability into dispersion of the difficulty that was there in Islamabad. The market went down 3.5%, came back nearly 5, and another 0.5% the next day. So market recouped these losses pretty quickly. So stay with the fund. 3 years external is covered. The authorities keep saying that we want to get investment. So SIFC and all the others, $2.7 billion, that's a realistic figure with Saudi Arabia. Mahrukh, I mean, whenever we've spoken, I don't like these 25, 30, 40, $50 billion figures, figures that have to make sense. You have to have some MOUs. So I believe the $2.7 billion that was agreed, part of those the Saudis have said have gone into implementation. So let's hope that that happens. Recordix in the pipeline. CPEC 2 is still slow. I think we've got to do a lot of work there. So you've now gotten with all this. So this is now the key sentence. First, I've always been saying, stay with the fund. You'll see stabilization. Mahrukh, you have time and space. So mark my words. Use that time and space very wisely to do the fundamental work that you have to do on the energy sector, on the rationalization of the expenditures, rationalization of Pakistan's regulatory framework, and set your growth framework right. And find engines of growth, engines of export. That's the next 2 to 3 years, which can define Pakistan out of the IMF. And keep the investor interest intact in Pakistan. I think that's largely.
I know that you are short of time. Thank you so much for being with us and giving us your very valuable time and always your very valuable input. Dr. Khaqan, one last question. As far as tax is concerned, do you see that the policy overall changing, or do you think that it should continue in the same vein?
So the policy is changing, and that is because I think we've literally been forced now that we have to have agriculture income tax. It's a provincial subject. They collect 8 billion rupees of tax when the whole country is paying 13,000 billion rupees of tax. So we've seen the legislation in Punjab. Again, IMF is pushing for that, and rightly pushing, so hopefully let's see legislation. I think real estate has now been taxed well. As we move along, we redo the prices. So slow, but there is movement. On the retailer and the wholesaler, I don't think we've ever been able to make headway. Point of sales machines, contacts, yes, we've improved again 2.5% withholding, but I think that's an area still stays on the weakness. But what now has to really improve is that Pakistan's taxation moves away from person to person contact into digitalization, into an area where we ease the burden on the on the income taxpayer, and take the burden onto the places where we have large tax gaps. the FPR says to us that 3,400 billion rupees is the sales tax gap. We've identified 270 billion out of it. So let's go after the 3,400 billion rupees. If we get 3,400 billion rupees, you would stop needing many of the donors to come to Pakistan and give funding. So one really hopes we, increase the base. We do digitalization, but we also do ease on the income taxpayers, especially the consultants and the people who are paying direct income tax. And we also see some rationalization of the whole tax system in making it easier. That's again the next 3 years if we can define this. So the Pakistan has good stabilization. It's by the book. If I read the literature on IMF in countries, that's how countries behave. Pakistan is behaving textbook. But all this work, all this task that I've said to you, trust me, neither the IMF's job to do it, nor they have the expertise to do it. They can do a bit of your fiscal consolidation, they can slow the economy, get your imports down, but they cannot create engines of growth. Neither do they do that. It's a doctor of the ICU. You are probably out of the ICU, if I can safely say, onto the surgical table. But if you don't show me the fundamental results, let me point one thing. You go to sell PIA, you have 4 good buyers, you have foreign interest, but you're unable to make that happen. So whenever Pakistan goes to do fundamental work, I think the delivery becomes uncomfortable. I think that's the task before the authorities. Can they actually deliver on these difficult items? I'm sure we are serious to do this. There's good foreign interest.
And we are seeing a lot of resolve come from the government also, as you've seen in the past also. Thank you so much, Dr. Khaqan. Thank you for being with us. I want to go to Dr. Manzoor. Dr. Manzoor, thank you so much for listening. Overall, as far as our sectors are concerned, in terms of where we are at this time, do you think as far as export growth is concerned, it's a welcome trend and it's likely to continue? Let's talk about that particularly.
Well, I mean, it's improving, I should say, but I think what the Prime Minister wanted to double it in 3 years or maybe maximum 5 years, and we are no more, we're not there.
Okay.
Because for that kind of increase, if you want to double our exports in 3 years, you need at least 25% growth every year, and it's normally about 8–10%.
But
yes.
In terms of growth, when we started off, when this government started off, and before that, there was overall, it was just stemming the blood flow, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was just doing a lot of damage control.
Yes.
We are very much out of the woods in that
Yes.
sense, no?
Yes, we are, getting out of woods, but unfortunately, we are not doing the reforms required to pick up the tempo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, for example, where do you think we need to? Let's talk about
that. Several things. First, we depend a lot on taxes on imports. I mean, imports, countries don't charge taxes because they let the goods come in and let it process and let it go out. And if you have such high taxes, that means it's a tax on your exports. So that's no exports is going to take place. Secondly, we are not trading within the region at all. I mean, we are stuck with none of the neighboring countries, and normally countries have about 40% there. Third is, in global value chains, we are not there. We still, where trading used to be about 30–40 years ago. So all these changes they have to do, otherwise they are not going to make a big.
But in terms of when we talk about reform, are we not, as the government has made some very tough decisions when it started. I mean, one has to acknowledge that. And as far as the role of the State Investment Finance Corporation is concerned, the SIFC is concerned, there is overall a resolve to get the country into the right direction in terms of our economy and to make that stronger. Of course, we are being dictated by IMF, and of course the terms overall are there. So in that sense, how would you change things? For example, let's talk about tax at this time.
You see, you're talking about some other sectors which they've had some reforms. But as far as taxation is concerned, very little. I mean, IMF pushed them to start getting taxes from agriculture sector and also.
But isn't that huge?
It is huge, but it
you're
hasn't
saying
made any impact.
more needs to be done. Certainly.
Oh, a lot more. They just started. I mean, nothing has been done. You know, just as Dr. Khaqan Najeeb was saying, we just collect something like 8 billion overall. You know, look at where we are, and you know, 3 trillion and 8 billion. It's nothing.
But we have, but as I understand, the National Economic Transformation Plan is 5 years based, so it's very much, you know, on track in that sense.
You know, those 5-year plans used to be there, but I read about it this morning, etc. But I don't think they work really. They have to do some. You named taxation. First is taxation, because the tax. Name any tax, whether sales tax, whether income tax, whether it's custom duty, they are extremely high, out of sync. So that means the investment is not coming in, and you know, local business is not picking up. So that is one thing. Second is, I just mentioned about these exports. Third is about SOE, the state operated enterprises, their privatization.
Which is something, again, the government is very serious about, and they're trying to start.
But it's been going on for years and
years.
Let
me go to Dr. Usman Chohan, and then I'll come back to you. Ji, Dr. Usman, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Dr. Usman, I've been talking to Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, and then Dr. Manzoor here is here with us. And do you think things are, you know, the glass is half full or the glass is half empty at this point? In terms of what the indicators are, clearly things seem to be stabilizing. Where we should be, certainly we could be doing a lot better, there's no denying that. But the question is, where were we and where we are now? I mean, is it, I know that Dr. Manzoor is the expert here, but the question is, realistically speaking, with the kind of security challenges, the kind of situation we are in terms of stability also, things are overall stable on the economic front, are they not, in your opinion?
Yes, first of all, salutations to you and to Dr. Manzoor. It's a pleasure to be with you. I see the glass as half full, as do you. And I share your sentiment that we should always keep in mind the immediate past was. Things were looking quite bleak for many developing countries around 2022. And it wasn't necessarily our fault, only to the extent that we had not invested in ourselves prior to be resilient enough. But, you know, we weren't the only ones in that boat. And so given that as our backdrop, and how the post-COVID recovery has been so uneven, so volatile, so dangerous, so turbulent, I think that we've done a very good job. And you see some indications of that. Some seem to be euphoric, such as our stock market. Others are more sober and yet positive, because certainly if you look at the last 2 years, there is far more to be satisfied about. And now the road ahead, which you have correctly spoken of previously, the road ahead is long and it requires sacrifice. But at least we don't have the immediacy of a crisis on our shoulders, and that's already a good thing.
In terms of export growth, as far as, you know, very little or more, again, Manzoor Sahab, Dr. Manzoor said that it should be above 25%. It's maybe at 8% at this time. I'm not the one with the figures, but overall, in terms of its growth, and rather than things, how do you look at it as an economist, first of all, before I give my opinion?
Well, I agree with Dr. Saab on this, but the most important thing for us is to develop a degree of economic complexity. Because if we are just concentrated on a limited number of exports, then the volatility tends to be very high, and you can be at the mercy of even minor regulations changing things, such as GSP Plus, for example. Now, we are coming into a new environment globally where tariffs might be a far more broadly used and abused tool for economic warfare. You are well familiar with what Trump has announced. Donald Trump, soon to be president of the United States, he wants to put a 10% tariff broad-based on everybody. Then he wants to put a 25% tariff on his immediate neighbors. What you will see from this is that so long as tariffs are put in, but existing frameworks are still in place, such as free trade agreements, it's hard to know how bad the damage on any country will be. For example, since we are a textile producer and our largest market is the US and then EU, the fact that there is a free trade agreement between the US and textile exporters near the US, such as Honduras, República Dominicana, these countries they will actually become for the first time more cost competitive than us. So what we want to see is how sweeping Trump's policies will be, because it creates a distortion as it is. But will it create distortions upon distortions that will impact our exports? I don't think enough is being said about this, and that's why I wanted to highlight this, because export growth is fundamentally an indigenous initiative where you produce and then you sell abroad, but someone's got to be there to buy it. And that's where the questions will also come up. And I think that trade overall will be disrupted significantly globally over at least the next 2 years, the first 2 years of Donald Trump's term.
But overall, in terms of, for example, state-owned enterprises are concerned, yes, it has been something that should have been done ages ago. And successive governments have tried, but other governments have perhaps not come as far as this one has. Isn't that also true? And where we are headed at this time?
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true, that there's far more political will right now to divest state-owned enterprises. But the concern is something that I think your audience will understand is it doesn't quite matter if it's state-owned or private. What really matters is that the leadership of every enterprise works with sincerity. There are actually cases in Pakistan of things that were privatized, and in private hands they were really, really misused. I'm not going to name names, but they were really badly done in the private hands. So whether it's state or private, if the leadership of that entity, that enterprise, doesn't run it with sincerity, with a long-term vision, you will see the problems. And so I don't necessarily automatically see divestiture as a catch-all solution, one size fits all. But in our case, overall, given the burden on the state, it was the right thing. And you're correct to note that there has never been a stronger political will, and that is partly because we have the buffer of the IMF to justify decisions that as you said correctly, had to be taken a long time ago.
Right, fair enough. Let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Dr. Manzoor. Dr. Manzoor, as far as we are looking at challenges in power and energy sector, like Dr. Khaqan said, he's saying that we are definitely following the right policies at this time. How long do you think it really takes for the tangibles and the results to come in, ordinarily speaking, when you start? And I know you may say that we started late, or but the direction at this time overall.
Well, I mean, the results only 2-3 years ago, look at where we were in terms of solar, and it's almost now, I don't know, but maybe by the end of this year, next year, half of our electricity would come there.
That's true.
And it's we don't have to import any fuel, any gas, anything.
And that's huge.
So it's huge. It's huge. And so things can happen quickly if it. And I must here commend the government that they went along with this solar, because they could have quite easily kept the sales tax on their 17%, which I think the current government, they removed it last year,
yes.
17%. Then the other thing is, normally there's a lot of pressure, okay, why do you do this net metering, and why don't you grid, etc. But they kept encouraging with net metering. They didn't put any duties on these solar panels, etc. So the thing started changing. So, in energy, we were in a lot of mess. And I think if we are able to, we are amongst the top 3 or 4 countries in the world in terms of solarization. So, the things can change quite quickly. I'm just saying in 2 years it happened.
And this is an example in this case as far as the power sector is concerned, and certainly solar is a case in point with regard to that. Let me come back to you. We also have with us Mehtab Haider, who's a senior journalist. Mehtab Sahab, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Mehtab Sahab, economy and the way that things are at this time, the indicators overall, we're talking about, the assessment of where we stand at this time, the direction in which we are going, and the pace at which we are getting there. As far as the pace is concerned, one can arguably say that it could be faster, but the direction certainly is there. What is your opinion on that?
Thank you very much. I think there are some positive indications. For instance, the inflation is on decline after we have witnessed higher inflation in last couple of years, last few years. but now the inflation has been falling and it's standing in the single digit. The problem is on the growth side, because Pakistan's GDP growth target has been envisaged at 3.5%. And now the projections are making by the multilateral donors, for instance, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the IMF, that it will be hovering around 2.5%, which is in accordance with the latest census report, will be similar to the population growth. So this kind of GDP growth will be insufficient to reduce poverty and unemployment. And on the other side, the fiscal side, I think there is a need to do more, because in last couple of months, if we see the 4 months of this financial year, there has been a shortfall we have seen in the collection of the FDR. But on the other side, the non-tax revenue have performed so far well. So there has been Ministry of Finance posted a revenue surplus. But in subsequent months, we can see that there might be a shortfall in the tax collection target. So the fiscal consolidation is another issue. Government has invested to reduce the expenditure side, and they are making a right-sizing plan. But it's a just plan. They will have to execute it to reduce the expenditure burden. Because when there is the shortfall...
Look at the 5-year plan as the government envisages it. You know, if all goes according to this plan and the direction also has been set and the pace is followed, don't you see a largely transformative economy emerging?
Then the problem is that, you know, we have seen in the past, whenever there is a requirement to comply with the conditions of the IMF, and the fiscal consideration mainly relies on reducing only the developmental expenditures. Now the time has come when the government should also reduce the expenditures on front side. For instance, there is a need to implement the 18th Amendment in its true letter and spirit. And all those ministries which have been devolved under the 18th Amendment, they should be transferred to the provinces. So the plan is there, but it needs effective and timely execution.
Right, fair enough. Thank you so much, Mehtab Sahib. Thank you for your very valuable input. Dr. Manzoor, you heard what Mehtab Sahib is saying overall. Let's talk about IT and digital economy. It's something that Dr. Khaqan also earlier mentioned. Of course, it's extremely important today for all of us. We are also looking at the government's concentration on the IT sector, on digital economy. How do we change things there, in your opinion? And do you think it can really be as massive a source of change as is envisaged?
Well, I do believe it can be a big source of change and big source of earning. And already I think in this, you know, overall growth may be 8%, but in terms of IT, it was about 35% growth in these last 4 months. So this is a very...
So something is working there.
Yes, there's the only problem is that, you know, this one sector should be given very special treatment, as some countries have done, because it's very easy for these IT people to move from one country to another, to change their station from here to here, and you won't even know where they're working here or there. So the government recently, in last budget, I think they raised the taxation on this thing. So that they need to reconsider. But they're giving a lot of attention to IT, and it seems to be giving some dividends, yes.
As far as, you know, of course, the aim is to significantly boost IT exports and also, you know, by 5 billion. And I believe by 2029. Do you think that's an ambitious figure, or do you think that it's possible at this time to envisage that it can happen?
I think that's rather ambitious because, from 4 billion, if you want to move to 35 billion, you said 25 billion?
No, I said 5 billion by 2029. Boost it to 5 billion. I think that's realistic.
I think because they're already getting to about 4 billion, so 5 billion is not,
so it's a quite easy target in that sense.
I think that their target is far more. I think what I hear is that the government is pushing.
If they're saying they want to boost it by 5 billion.
By 5 billion, but they want to boost it by about 20 billion.
Okay.
They want to. They're very, very optimistic target. They say from 4 billion we should move to 25 billion.
And do you think that's possible?
Well, everything is possible, but they have to, I mean...
But what is needed in your opinion in terms of the climate at this time,
for example,
in terms of overall policy?
Infrastructure. The internet has recently deteriorated rather than, quicker internet is deteriorated, the quality has deteriorated.
So you think those are things?
Has worsened. And these other infrastructure things have not really kept pace with, if you want to have that kind of it, then you'll have to do all this. But they are, I must say, doing a few things. For example, they are collaborating with Saudi Arabia. They want to, I think I hear that they offered to train something like 100,000 people, pay for them, and some US company, etc. And so that's one. And then Chinese, they are also doing a similar thing. So if we can get all those people really trained,
if we can get that kind of investment.
Yes.
Which it depends on. Let me go to Usman Sahib. Dr. Usman, do you think that, of course, as far as pledges of support by other countries are concerned, we have had some, but do you think that, these pledges will, and of course, in terms of the UAE, as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, as far as China is concerned, we do expect more, and that's also quite realistic, no?
Yes, but fundamentally, I believe that we now have the capability to stand on our own feet. What we require from other countries is cooperation and openness for economic activity. Saudi Arabia, UAE, and China have been outstanding friends, all-weather friends. And just the mere fact that they help with the rollover of liabilities to them is in itself a great thing, but credit to them for their time-tested friendship. And of course, now I believe that as we have discussed, things are getting better. Now we are in a phase where we can start to think about how we would like to do business with the rest of the world as a whole and not be in dependency of any kind. Plus, surprising that there's going to be a lot of countries with dependencies of various kinds just because the world economy is going to be quite topsy-turvy over the next 2 years. We shouldn't be one of those countries. So insofar as our close friends go, I'm very satisfied with the relationship and I don't expect any issues on that front. But I do expect us to bring more to the table because Pakistan has a lot to bring to the table for Saudi Arabia, UAE, and China, and then for the rest of the world as well. And that's actually the mindset we should be operating with now, since we're not in a crisis right now. And, your stock market is doing so well, just as one bellwether. Things are now in a different, we should be thinking in a different state of mind now, really.
And what state of mind would that be? We are not, more optimistic, you're saying?
Yes, a mindset of openness, optimism, and growth. Because now that we have put reform in motion, the signal to the rest of the world should be that the burdens of the past have been shed and that we are a serious player who wants to do business, who wants to contribute, who wants to lead to global stability and global growth, be a valuable contributor to the world community, really. And that has a very large trade and economic element too. So what I'm saying is that we need kind of a refresher mentally, because it's been a tough decade, but doesn't mean we have to be mired in that state of mind forever. And I think that there's plenty of reasons to think. I mean, if you believe that things are getting better, then you should also believe that our mindset should adapt to that betterment and move forward.
Fair enough. But Dr. Usman, what about, of course, one of the other challenges that we've seen are structural reforms. Do you think that we are making headway with regard to structural reforms, particularly, of course, with regard to industrial development, agriculture and food security? Are those important areas, right?
They absolutely are important areas, and you certainly see the political will there to start to set things in the correct motion, and they have already been set on the right path. The question is always about execution. How far can you go, rather than just making those incipient reforms that may be shallow and then can be reversed also? You want to have deep-seated reforms that actually alter the structure, hence the structural reform element. And on that front, I think work is being done, except that there are vested interests in all sectors that are trying to make the government's job difficult every step of the way. Some of those vested interests are within government. Some of them are closely attached to government. Some of them are very distant from government, but they all want their cut. And that's the paradox of a country like Pakistan, not specifically us, but countries like us, is that everybody seems to be doing pretty all right, except for everybody as a whole. And that's why you have to bring everybody on the same page, so that these vested interests are aligned with the broader national economic interest. And that's how we should end up going. Otherwise, vested interests have a parasitic relationship and they draw upon it. And any effort to be reformed will at best be superficial and probably reversed in due course. And that's not what you and I want. What we want is for the deep structure to alter for the benefit of a people that are growing in demographic size, that are moving forward, that are young, that want to engage with the rest of the world, that are keen to unleash their economic energies. So that's what we're aiming for.
Right. Dr. Manzoor, I think that's something that's very interesting what Dr. Usman said. He said everybody seems to be doing okay except everybody as a whole. So how do we get everybody as a whole? Do you think that that unifying factor is also needed, right? Collective goal.
Yes, I think you made a very good point that everybody seems to be.
Yeah.
Somebody said all the hotels are full and everything is full, but overall the country
isn't doing too great.
Not really growing too much. I mean, we for the last 5-6 years we didn't grow at all. I mean, okay, this year we grew 2.5%, but that's as the point was made that this is just about equal to the population growth. So we have to now, we have had it for a very long time. We didn't grow. We need to catch up with the rest. Even our our region, at least 5-6% growth, and for those we need all those reforms that you've been referring this. The things.
But if this growth trend continues, of course, we anticipate an increase next year, for example. What is the best case scenario if this is, if this space is, a best case scenario increased, so to speak?
Well, I think the anticipation is that it will be about 3%, but they can quite easily go to 3.5 to 4%.
Right.
I think so, because the first step, I think they've quite successfully, I mean, they were talking about stock exchange, the best in the world, other things, best in the world. So why can't we have our growth a little bit higher than our population growth?
And that also is something, of course, a cause of concern, our population growth and the pace at which our population is growing.
Yes.
So there are a lot of issues, as is climate damage, as is population growth, as is overall security situation. So the government, of course, is dealing with all those
That's what I'm saying, that they had all these problems in the last 4 or 5 years. There was the floods, and there was COVID, and there were all those problems. But fortunately, they're coming out of it. So they need to think another way now, that we need
to increase this, how to make the pace faster.
Yes, how to grow faster.
And how to concentrate on those sectors like, for example, IT, which the government is already doing, but perhaps increase the pace.
Yes.
And of course, like you said, the solar, of course, the switch to solar and the pace of it is certainly a case in point with that.
Yes. And I think with solar, they should also move to this electric vehicles, because we have this big problem of smog and emissions, and this, and this is a new technology. We should quickly adopt these technologies so that the country moves up quicker.
Right. Yeah. And are we working towards adopting this technology? I'm sorry.
We are much slower than, say, next door India. I mean, we set up some target about, in 2019, that by 2030, in 5 years' time, we would have 30% overall electric vehicles. But we are nowhere. In 5 years, in 2024, we have not even reached 1%.
So we need to concentrate.
We need to concentrate. Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manzoor. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Usman Chohan, thank you for joining us today. Dr. Khaqan, Najeeb, thank you for being with us. Mehtab Haider, thank you for your very valuable input. Of course, overall, what we are looking at this time is a government dealing with a multitude of challenges, whether we look at of course, the security situation, the challenges there, whether we look at overall overpopulation, whether we look at climate damage, those are just some of the issues. But at the same time, the ray of hope is the way that we've seen the stock exchange rise up, the way that we've seen the overall experts, the trends overall that show that economic prosperity certainly is around the corner, and that the pace of it, if it's increased, can certainly be monumental. Thank you so much for joining us today on